pleasant day to all, and welcome to our final episode of Facts Talk podcast. This project is made possible through the collaboration between Facts Asia and the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung Philippines. I am Diane Carrer. I'm a TV host and news anchor based in the Philippines. Here in Facts Talk, we will examine Europe's strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. And today, we will focus on the seventh priority area for cooperation, and that is human security. In the past few years, European states have been actively engaging in the Indo-Pacific. Last year, Facts Asia and CAS Philippines launched a compilation of special articles that tell us how European states have significant interest in the region, including their policy recommendations for cooperation between the Philippines, ASEAN, and the European Union. Time flies by so quickly, and we're already on our last episode. In the past few months, we have invited experts to discuss EU strategies and their implications for the Indo-Pacific. Now in this episode, we will talk about the developments in human security, an approach to security that goes beyond states as actors, but rather brings in the human factor. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the limits of having a purely traditional security lens and demonstrated that such an approach to national security is no assurance of societal resilience or individual protection. Hence, today, we will tackle the EU strategy for cooperation, which highlighted working with partners to support healthcare systems and pandemic preparedness for the least developed countries in the Indo-Pacific region, and reinforce the EU's disaster risk reduction and preparedness engagement in the Indo-Pacific. Joining us today to talk about this highly relevant topic is our special guest expert, Dr. Ana Isabel Xavier, Associate Professor at the Autonomous University of Lisbon. Dr. Xavier, good day to you, and welcome to Facts Talk podcast.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Dr. Xavier, before we discuss the last priority area of cooperation, we want to know more about you. Briefly, tell us what you do and your expertise about our subject matter for today.
So I'm Portuguese, coming from Portugal, from a town called Coimbra, one of the most ancient universities in Europe. And I am a university professor and researcher in the field of international relations, especially European Union and security and defense. I also engage with several activities in Portugal with the representation of European Commission and also through the European College of Security and Defense. From March 2015 to February 2017, I also served as a National Defense Policy Deputy Director at the Portuguese Ministry of Defense. And I am also an analyst of international affairs at our Portuguese radio and television. That means that I always try to balance my academic and my practitioner areas and dimensions in order to research and to keep on investing my research on security and defense.
It's a pleasure to have an expert like you, Dr. Xavier, who has both experience in the academe and in practice. Now, focusing this time on human security, how will you define this, and why is this important for the EU? How has European states championed or applied a human-centered approach to security?
We start with the €1 million question, in fact, because the definition is the first challenge. Human security is highly contested in terms of the consensus in terms. But I would say that human security refers to the protection and well-being of individuals, with a particular focus on safeguarding people from a wide range of threats and challenges that can undermine their safety, dignity, and quality of life. It encompasses various dimensions of security beyond traditional military and state-centric concerns. And that is very important because, in fact, what we acknowledge is that traditional responses and the state-centric approach is not enough to actually embody a human security approach and embody this multilateral world where we live on. So human security in that purpose is also quite central for the European Union because it aligns completely with the European Union's principles, core values. It contributes to regional and global stability, allows the European Union to address contemporary challenges effectively, and also reflects the European Union's commitment to well-being, human rights, dignity, both within its borders and with its neighborhoods and external action. And that is also very important because for the European Union, the stability of the neighborhood is the stability of the European Union per se. So that's why also not only multilateralism, but regionalism is so important for the European Union. And that's why also the European Union addresses human security as going through the root causes of conflicts and vulnerabilities, ensuring that human security is essential for preventing conflicts, violence, instability, and that's how the European Union can contribute to regional and global peace and stability, reinforcing the commitment to multilateralism and cooperation in addressing global challenges. The European member states have championed and tried to apply a human security approach in various ways, reflecting, of course, their commitment to all these areas. And especially in their diplomatic efforts, they actually tackle this human rights response internationally. But what is quite curious is that the European Union is a quite sui generis international organization. It is, in fact, a coalition of 27 member states. So it is quite hard to agree that the European Union per se has a common definition on human security. In part, what European Union addresses is the sum of the 27 member states' approach on human security. And in 2003, there was an attempt through the High Representative at the time, Javier Solana, to actually have a common approach on human security. It was first attempt to the European Security Strategy in 2003, and then on the implementation report 5 years later. And the only agreement that the reports show is that security is a precondition for development, and development is a precondition for security. So the two concepts actually go together, and we cannot foresee security without development and development without security, which is actually quite an interesting definition for the European Union that actually encompasses the definition of human security of the United Nations, that since 1994, since the United Nations Development Program report, have been studying human security and acknowledging that actually security and development must go together in order to emphasize a common approach on human security.
Well, I agree that security is a precondition for development and vice versa. Security and development indeed go hand in hand, and the situation in Myanmar is an example of how states behave when they feel insecure. By approaching human security and looking at security through individual or grassroots level, it enables us to identify violent and non-violent threats and come up with solutions that are proactive and inclusive for the good of the people. Now, we want to know your views on these questions, Dr. Xavier. What can the Indo-Pacific, especially the ASEAN region, learn from the EU's experience and approaches? And why is the EU interested in sharing its experiences through the EU strategy for cooperation?
Well, I would argue that the Indo-Pacific region, especially the ASEAN countries, can learn several valuable lessons and approaches from the European Union, as well as the opposite. The European model does not fit all. The context, the challenges, the political dynamics in the Indo-Pacific region, including ASEAN, are quite distinct. You mentioned, for now specifically, the question of Myanmar. So that means that it's quite diverse. We cannot talk about a single Indo-Pacific region. The context is very diverse, and European model cannot fit all. Still, and that's why, of course, any application of the EU models or the EU approaches should be tailored to suit the specific needs and circumstances of the Indo-Pacific region. And that's also very interesting because human security is also tailor-made, is also about empowering communities, having in mind their own context, their own challenges. And that's why it's so important to know the context, the roots of the questions in order to have a tailor-made solution and not a European model fits all. But it's obvious that the European Union's experience offers a number of relevant examples, policies, and strategies that can be inspiring for the Indo-Pacific context. I would highlight three. The first one is the regional cooperation and the economic integration. European Union is based in a single market and the customs union that brought in the 50s, in the 20th century, countries with a history of conflict, such as France and Germany, and that's why everything started by merging the coal and steel industry after the Second World War. But not only throughout this single market and customs union, but also through mechanisms like Schengen, an area where the European citizens can freely move, and not only citizens, but also investments and capitals in general, and also Eurozone, where the member states share a common currency. That is quite interesting because for a lot of people, the European Union is a model, an inspiring model in these three areas. A second area that I think it can be inspiring for the Indo-Pacific and for ASEAN countries in particular is the one on democracy, human rights, rule of law, or even standards on environmental sustainability as a precondition for trade agreements and foreign aid. That means that European Union only negotiates and only agrees on specific issues if democracy, human rights, rule of law, standards on environment are actually included on those agreements. And the European Union's experience in coordinating foreign policy among member states can also be an added value in addressing regional security concerns and shaping a common foreign policy based on crisis management and conflict resolution. A third area that I would like to highlight are the European Union's efforts in harmonizing regulations and standards across member states in areas such as pharmaceuticals, aviation, food security, or even public health crisis. And on that purpose, the COVID-19 response was quite interesting because for the first time, the European Commission gathered to negotiate vaccines for the European Union citizens on behalf of European Union member states. And that was quite an example that inspired other areas in the EU, namely in phasing out the energy dependence towards the Russian Federation, for instance, or even other areas like the acquisition of ammunition for Ukraine. So it all started with the pandemics, but in fact, it has to do with the ability of the EU to harmonize regulations and standards, both on the health and economic growth or in other areas such as military. In what concerns the EU strategy for cooperation, it is an initiative that reflects the European Union's interest in sharing experiences and expertises with other regions and countries. And there are several reasons for the EU to have an interest in doing so. It promotes stability and peace, to begin with. It promotes democratic values and human rights. It fosters economic prosperity. So a lot of things. And in brief, what the EU strategy for cooperation reflects is the EU's commitment to promote values, experiences, expertise, encouraging, inspiring other regions to pursue similar efforts in terms of integration and aligning a global responsibility and commitment towards multilateralism while strengthening diplomatic influence and the global partnerships.
Well, that is a very interesting point to highlight, Dr. Xavier. European models and experiences may not be suitable for Indo-Pacific states, whether due to cultural, political, or economic dynamics, but there are still some instances where ASEAN can learn from EU's experience. Dr. Xavier, what are the distinctive features for cooperation and or hard connectivity and soft connectivity potentials that may contribute to better cooperation between European states and the Indo-Pacific region?
That's a very interesting question, I have to admit, and it's quite an important issue for the European Union. Because the cooperation between the European Union states and the Indo-Pacific region can actually be facilitated through both of these areas, hard connectivity and soft connectivity. these two types of connectivity offer distinct features and opportunities for cooperation, and we have to see them together and not apart. On hard connectivity, I think you can find potential on infrastructure development, transport and trade, energy, sustainable development, digital connectivity, maritime security, or even climate resilience. European states can partner with developing countries in the Indo-Pacific to fund or support infrastructure projects fostering economic growth and trade, but also supporting the development of trade routes, ports, and transportation corridors, such as the Belt and Road Initiative that is already ongoing. On soft connectivity, I would focus on education and capacity building, cultural exchanges, diplomatic and political dialogue, public health, again, very important, and healthcare cooperation, rule of law, good governance, trade agreements, and economic cooperation. Again, it's essential to note that both hard and soft connectivity are interrelated, and a holistic, a comprehensive approach is needed in order to combine these elements and be more effective in fostering the cooperation between the European Union member states and the Indo-Pacific region. The most important thing is for the European partners or European member states to partner with countries in the Indo-Pacific that have mutual interests and developments, and in order to identify specific projects and initiatives that aligned with both goals and with the engagement of regional organizations such as ASEAN to promote the regional integration and cooperation in a whole.
Well, both soft connectivity and hard connectivity are interrelated. And it really is important to have both, especially when EU wants to comprehensively engage with Indo-Pacific states or with ASEAN. Now, I have mentioned this earlier, but backpedal a bit on the Myanmar crisis. ASEAN has been in a deadlock on how to address the crisis. Considering that there is a high number of refugees and asylum seekers, what do you think are the lessons can ASEAN gain from the EU strategy in dealing with the humanitarian crisis? What can ASEAN do to further its initiatives in protecting refugees and asylum seekers?
Well, actually, the question of refugees and migration flows in general is quite sensitive on the European Union at this moment. Actually, since at least 2013, the European Union is struggling with the massive flow of people that want to come for Europe. And the debate on the European Union is now moving to an attempt of a common approach on migration and asylum, trying to agree on a common agreement on that purpose in order to commit the 27 member states of burden sharing, of course, but also on sharing their solidarity. And it's quite sensitive because Italy, in specific, has been struggling with thousands and thousands of migrants and refugees that are coming every day especially to Lampedusa island. And it's quite an issue that divides the member states at this moment. And there is no green light in the European Union institutions in order to actually move forward, because especially some countries from the Eastern European countries do not agree with several proposals that Italy wants to pursue in order to share the burden and help these people also in the origin and transit countries not to come to the European Union. And it's not only a very sensitive issue in the European Union, but it's also an issue that illustrates how the European Union is not able to actually tackle this issue successfully. And all the attempts the European Union as a whole made on the issue was to actually try to buffer the impact on the European Union and make some regional agreements with the neighborhood, namely with the Western Balkans and also Turkey. So both on the eastern borders and on the southern borders with Turkey. So I don't know if this is the right moment for the European Union to actually inspire other regions in the world, namely ASEAN, to tackle the issue of migration and refugee. But theoretically, I would say that the key to actually tackle such an issue is, first of all, to have a common approach in ASEAN in order to know, first of all, what should be the approach on migrants and the common approach on refugee and on the applications for the refugee status. That distinction is very important, and it's quite lacking on this European Union response. On the migration area, also important to distinguish what should be the response towards the legal migration and fostering legal migration. For instance, the European Union has developed, for instance, a blue card, a kind of a fast-track procedure for all those that want to enter legally to the European Union and actually are high qualified. So for those kind of profiles, the European Union developed this blue card, this fast-track procedure to actually attract high qualified migrants, for legal migrants for the European Union to work and to live. So I would start by distinguishing what should be the response to legal migration and the response to illegal immigration. And for illegal immigration, you really have to cooperate with the United Nations. The United Nations Migrations Office, the International Organization for Migration, and also the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. So after distinguishing the responses to these different phenomena, I would then try to agree on a common approach on ASEAN and how the cooperation between ASEAN countries can actually have a common voice and a single voice on that. It is very important in this issue to balance what it is the protection of people and what it should be a human right and a human security approach, and what has to be also the fight against human smuggling, human trafficking, drug trafficking, international crime in general. So we need to protect, but we also need to safeguard our borders and the threats that are coming to our borders. So I don't know if in this specific issue, the European Union can be inspiring and a successful model for ASEAN, but I would for sure start with this distinction between legal and illegal, migrants and refugees, and of course, balancing always the protection of human rights and human dignity and the fight against those that are profiting with this.
Well, I agree with your last point, Dr. Xavier, that it's not just the EU or ASEAN as an organization that has been dealing with these issues that are really very challenging as a whole for everyone. So we should be partnering more and cooperating with these issues, and we should be working together to resolve the issues. Last but not the least, Dr. Xavier, what are the threats and challenges in the strategy for cooperation in human security? You mentioned earlier that, for instance, the European Union is promoting democracy and human rights and other values. Do you think that these safeguards before cooperating with certain developing countries in the region, will that become challenges that instead of promoting human security, will it somehow prevent the EU from cooperating with these challenging states?
Well, absolutely. But that's why also the European Union strategy for cooperation in the Asia-Pacific region is so important because it actually tackles threats and challenges in the context of human security, starting with, as you mentioned, the question of human rights, promotion of democracy and rule of law, good governance, but starting again with the roots and with the conflict and regional tensions, ongoing territorial disputes, historical tensions, potential flashpoints that pose direct threats to the human security of people living in affected areas can actually hinder the European Union's efforts to promote peace and stability. Also, the threat of terrorism, transnational crime, including drug trafficking, human trafficking, and cybercrime. All those threats in the region can actually undermine human security. So that's why also in the European Security Strategy in 2003, the first attempt of the European Union was to identify what were the main threats, the main challenges to the European Union to tackle if a human security approach should be elaborated. In addition, we know that many countries in the Asia-Pacific region grapple with issues related to human rights violations, including restrictions on freedom of expression, political dissent, and religious freedom. That leads inevitably to forced displacement, whether due to conflict, environmental factors, poverty, lack of access to essential services, and income inequality, which can lead to even more social unrest and instability. So again, that's why it's so important to go to the roots of the conflicts. Another challenge is the one of the environment. Natural disasters such as earthquakes, tsunamis, typhoons, floods, climate change, and environmental degradation in general can disrupt lives, livelihoods, and communities, and they require a coordinated response to mitigate their impacts. Here again, the word is prevent, is to plan in advance in order to have infrastructures to mitigate the impact, and not only response when humanitarian assistance is needed. And as we know, the region of Asia-Pacific is quite sensitive on this area. But the challenge that is most stressed by the European Union is the one of health security and pandemics in what concerns this new strategy for cooperation in the Asia-Pacific region, which is quite interesting because these strategies from 2021. So of course, pandemics COVID-19 was quite on the spotlight. So that's why probably it is the key focus of the cooperation with many partners of the Indo-Pacific region. As you probably know, the European Union adopted two major regional programs in 2020 to assist partners in coping with the sanitary impact of the pandemic by providing personnel and medical equipment, medicines, and health expertise, but not only related with the health experience, with the health pandemics and experience, of course, also in what concerns the ability to help with communications and with preventing this kind of pandemics. The European Union also offered new services to broadcast alert messages using the Galileo infrastructure through the European Global Navigation Satellite System. So to address all these threats and challenges, the European Union strategy for cooperation in the Asia-Pacific region must actually address a comprehensive and multi-pronged approach, and that includes a structural diplomatic effort to promote dialogue, conflict resolution, support the civil society, human rights organizations, disaster preparedness and response, investment in sustainable development, and cooperation on healthcare and pandemic response. So the European Union response will only be successful if it has the ability to build partnerships and engage with regional organizations such as ASEAN, which is crucial for coordinate and effectively response to all these complex human security challenges.
Well, on that note, we would like to thank you, Dr. Xavier. Thank you very much for the information you shared to us today. And of course, we'd like to thank all of you who joined us today. The EU's experience in fostering engagement with other states, dealing with issues and integrating their policy approaches stems from their approach to addressing problems through the lens of human security. The EU might not be an applicable model for Indo-Pacific states, especially ASEAN, but the EU's experiences and assistance through the strategy for cooperation may be helpful for states in building and promoting human security. If you loved and learned from this podcast, please share this episode with your friends and colleagues. And also, if you missed our previous ones, you may also listen to them here on Spotify. We invite you as well to like and follow Facts Asia official social media accounts, facebook.com/FactsAsia on Facebook and at FactsAsia.org on Twitter. We also visit our website, www.factsasia.org, to stay updated on our projects. So that's all for now. Again, this is your host, Diane Carrer. Until the next episode of Facts Talk.